Welcome back to West Fork, friends. I was fortunate the other day on a hike that my wife and I took to bump into a small grove of paper birch and harvested some really nice strips of birch bark for my fire kit. It's really tough to find birch trees around here for that. It got me to thinking about another type of birch that is much more of a shrub than a tree, called water birch. How many water birch trees I've walked by and never tried to use the bark for tinder. Water birch likes to grow in the creeks. It's not a real showy tree at all. It doesn't have the exfoliating bark like river birch or paper birch does. But I'm very curious to find out if the bark has some of the same properties as the more popular birches you hear so much about. So I'm going to go down to the creek and take you with me and see if they're any good for a fire starter. Okay, we're looking back down on the creek now. I can see some alders, some red osier dogwoods. Those are companion species. And right there is a big scraggly clump of water birch. Some people call it red birch. Some people call it swamp birch. And here's another nice one. This one's about 30 feet tall. They're very twiggy. They tip over when you get heavy snow years. They're not the strongest tree around, but they do grow quickly. This is a clumping type of tree. So I found that one. And water birch isn't really known for shedding its bark. You don't see any big pieces of paper hanging off the trunks there that just invite you to walk up and peel them. And I do see some dead material here. It might be interesting to try that for fire starter, as well as some of the living bark. Okay, this here is what I would call a mature water birch specimen. And you can see there's, on the very old ones, kind of a reddish hue, similar to river birch. This is Betula occidentalis, whereas river birch is a larger tree, Betula nigra. They're in the same family of birches, but they're different species. And on these very large ones, we have a little bit of peeling going on the trunks, and I'm curious maybe to try that too. So I guess I'll get my knife out and get busy and collect some of this for a test. Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do, since I found a tree that actually has a little bit of bark peeling off, I'm going to collect some of that and put it in my pocket here. Oh, there's a nice big one. Look at that. See, the thing with this is you have to find a really big one to find any kind of bark peeling on them at all. Actually, all the books say that bark doesn't peel, but I found one here that does. We're just going to give this a try. These water birch are found all over western North America. Anywhere from northern Arizona all the way up into Alaska, Yukon Territory, western Canada, Saskatchewan, even as far east as Ontario in Canada. So it's really common. You're going to find it in the mountains, in the creeks, on the north sides of hills where there's a lot of water throughout the summer. And it gets good fall color when it's in sunny locations. So if you see like logging clearings and stuff that all come up into yellow, there's a good chance that it's water birch that's taken off in there. Most of the time you're going to find small trees. Like I say, they tip over in the snow real easily. So they're just not a real durable tree. That's probably plenty to get a fire started if this stuff will burn. We'll just stick that in my pocket here. And the next thing I want to do is find a dead tree and try to take the entire bark off the outside of it and see what that looks like. Yeah, I see dead birch all over the ground here, and I'm going to try to find one that hasn't been there forever, because it might not have any oil in the bark. I see one over there that's kind of suspended off the ground over in the brush. Might go try to get a piece of that. Interesting. All the wood in the inside the bark has rotted out, leaving me with this nice hollow tube. That would lead me to believe that there's a lot of resin or a lot of oils in this bark that preserved it. That's a nice big piece. I'll have to give that a try. Well, it's a real jungle in here, but I did find some young birch here, a sapling, well, a sprout coming out of a larger tree. I'm going to take a little sample of that just by scraping. I'm going to scrape the surface of it. There's a lot of sap in there, so I'm not sure how good that would be. I'm just going to take a sample by scraping some of this into a little mint box. Okay, so I have a partial mint box full of the fine shavings off the young saplings. I've got this nice big dead tube, and also in my shirt pocket I have some nice ones that I was able to peel from the outside. I want to give you a couple more tips on how to identify water birch so that you can find it for yourself in the future. It doesn't have a lot of real flashy characteristics, so it's really good to know a couple of the subtleties. So before we try this out, I'll just give you a couple tips. One of the easiest ways to identify water birch is by looking at the bark. This is often called red birch. As a matter of fact, that's what I usually call it. It's probably more widely known as water birch. But if you look at the bark, it's red, sort of like a cherry tree. And it has these little white lenticels on the bark here. They're little pores, little bumps on the side of the bark. And that will help you find birch trees in general, because they all have this. They have reddish bark. When it gets older, it kind of turns gray. Here's a nice sapling, and you can see the twigs are very small and fine out toward the tips, tapering slowly. The buds on the stems are alternating, which means they're alternating sides and they're in singles, not in pairs. And they always come to a nice point on the end. In the spring there could be catkins on these, so that helps you to identify the birch as well. One identifying feature for red birch or water birch is the fact that they're just not a very stately looking tree. Take this specimen for example. It has some erect branches here. They're a clumping form. And then over here you have dead, broken, hanging. They're really quite a part of the thicket. They're good habitat for grouse and other birds to hide in because some of these thickets can be pretty impenetrable. Okay, well that's about enough time spent down in the thicket. When you do come into one of these thickets, you might want to bring eye protection because there's a lot of things going on in there. I end up blinking my eyes a lot, but there's a lot of potential to get your face whacked by those little birch limbs. So let's take what we got, let's take our samples up to camp and find out if this stuff is good for the fire kit. Stay tuned. Well, if you watched my video named Bushcraft Field Trip, this is the same spot. I left the fire ring here. This is a place that I like to visit over and over again. And it's a really nice day out here. So let's get started. Let's see if some of this birch bark will pick up a spark from my ferro rod. Yeah, the first thing I want to start with is this old dead tube. I found a lot of these laying on the ground. The bark is still in pretty good shape. I'm going to peel off a good sized chunk of that. And I'm going to see if I can lay that out on the ground and scratch a little bit of shavings onto there. It does scrape somewhat. It's kind of crusty. That looks like enough. Just kind of bundle that into a little pile here. And we'll get some little strips like this in case it does flare up. Peel off some smaller. These feel like they still have oil in them. I mean, they're flexible, a lot like leather. I got a feeling this stuff's going to work out pretty good. And all this time, how many patches of this have I walked by looking for fat wood? Well, you got fat wood all you want right there in the swamp. If it'll burn. I'm going to take just a little bit more. Scrape off just a little bit more. Still in good shape. Now if that didn't have oil in it, it'd be rotten as that wood back there. Okay, so here we go. Put that in the middle. I hope you can see that okay. I'm going to try to drop a spark in there. And hey, look at there. See if we can get this thicker stuff igniting. So again, this was bark from a dead tree found laying kind of partially suspended on the ground, a little bit above the snow line. And it's flexible like leather. I scraped it, it picks up a spark real well. Doesn't seem to be taking off as well as fat would, but then again, it's not completely dry. But anyway, we got a fire there, a good fire. So there you have it, the dead and down, hollowed out bark from the water birch. Burns like crazy. The next test is going to be some of that prime stuff that we stripped off that mature specimen. Stay tuned for that. First we have to let this die down. Well, this stuff's been going for about 5 minutes already, and there's just a ton of fuel in that old rotten log that I picked up off the ground. I wanted to add that you can find this stuff on both sides of the Rockies. You aren't likely to notice it when you drive by or hike by. You kind of got to know how to identify this type of birch. But look up Betula occidentalis and learn about it, because it's on both sides of the Rockies and both sides of the Cascades. It's real common in the foothills of the Cascades and very common on the east side of the Cascades in wet areas. And we sure didn't have trouble finding any today. But for us to find paper birch or white birch, we have to drive several hours to find those kind of locations that have groves. Okay, it's probably been about 7 or 8 minutes and this stuff's still going strong. I'm going to go ahead and stomp it out here so we can try our next experiment. Man, this is like putting out a gasoline fire. It's a lot like fat wood. All right, there's a good test block right there. I hope you can see this okay. This is the shaggy peelings that I peeled off that mature tree. And I'm not going to do anything with this or scrape it. I'm just going to try to drop a spark in the middle of it, see if it'll ignite. There we go. Might be a little bit of moisture in that. It has been a little humid out. I think we had a humidity of about 86% this morning. And this is right on the outside, so it could pick up a little moisture. But I didn't have too much trouble getting it to take a spark. So I sure wouldn't pass this stuff up. That was easy to get. Just drop it in your pocket and you're good to go. Plenty of oil in it. Okay, well, since that stuff is so fine, it isn't burning near as long as some of that thicker bark that I peeled off. This is just the very outside layer of the bark. The rotten piece that I burned was very thick and leathery. But this stuff sure did pick up a spark real well. And if you had some other stuff to back it up, you'd get a fire going in no time. Okay, well, we have one more test to do. And that's using the very outer skin of the sapling tree that I scraped on with my knife. And I used that little mint container to catch it. So let's see if that stuff will pick up a spark. And if it does, since I don't expect it'll burn a long time, I'll have some shreds of other bark ready to go, and we'll see if we can get a fire going with that too. Well, I just have plenty of left of this little tube. I think that's the coolest thing, the way that rots out like that. Here's a nice little platform for some of our fine powder. I want to show you what this looks like too. It looks a lot like fatwood shavings, like you took the back of your knife. And it's really delicate. Beautiful stuff. Let's see if it'll catch a spark. That tube makes a great windscreen. Also makes a nice rain hat. What a great way to get a fire going. These experiments went so well, I think I'll be the first to nickname this stuff Fatwood of the Swamp. Well, there you have it, folks. A whole new resource for you. You might not have ever noticed. I hope you learned something. I sure did. This is going to be a great thing for me in the future. As you can tell, that rotten tube really took off. There's a lot of fuel in that, and that was just laying on the ground. I'm going to leave you some handy links in the comment or in the description area where you can learn about this species of birch and maybe put it to use for yourself. Well, friends, that's about it for today. I want to thank you for joining us here on the West Fork channel. I hope to see all of you on here again real soon. Until next time, this is over and out from the West Fork Woodsman.